So I thought I'd put some time aside and do a follow-up review of the Ginault Ocean Rover. The last review was more of a comparison between this and the Steinhardt Ocean 1, but this is the most important part of the equation, and I think it needs a lot more attention. So I'm going to summarize it from a design perspective again. I'm going to focus on it as a designer would, looking at the proportions, the aesthetics, the details. So let's get into it. I have owned this watch now for a week and a half, and I have not used it as a daily wearer. I have worn it occasionally in the evenings and if I'm going out somewhere, but otherwise it hasn't been used very heavily. As you can see, the clasp is still in scratch-free condition, which is quite nice. I've made one adjustment which has changed the watch sitting on the wrist especially. You can now see that it's very centered, and I did that by removing a hole link on the one side of the bracelet, which is this side, replacing that hole link with a half link on this side of the bracelet, and it fits so much better now because the adjustments are a lot more minute. I use these little flathead screws to gauge the depth of the glide lock, so it's a lot more assuring. And again, talking about the clasp, it is so reassuring. Having this thing secure itself on your wrist, you feel like this thing is not going anywhere. It's really it's the most highlighted and important feature, I think, of this watch that would appeal to everyone in the Homage watch community. So, focusing on the details, let's get into the heritage and the history of this watch and why I think that it's a very interesting brand that Ginault has chosen. If you were to give this to the person sitting next to you in a lecture hall or in an office and ask them to give you a predicted age of this watch, what era it was made, I would think the result would be around the 60s and 70s, maybe even the 50s, if these people weren't aware of heritage and history and watches in themselves. This watch looks very classical. Excuse me. It looks very classical in its proportions, its makeup, its aesthetics, and it really plays to the brand. If I now go into details that I didn't cover previously, we're talking about the logo, this little crown, which is a tropical flower. Very classical, following Tudor-ish heritage. It's a very nice approach. The name Ginault is also very nice, and it looks, the text and the dial, what they've chosen, the serifed font, gives it a very classical feel, no doubt. So talking about some details that I didn't cover in the previous review that I should have, very important details. Firstly, talking about timekeeping, most important thing. The watch has been jumping between 3 seconds fast, it's been running perfectly, and 3 seconds slow. That's the tolerance that has been running in at the moment. And I think it varies whether you're wearing it or not during the day. I feel like it's still taking time to warm up to the wrist, but it is running very efficiently. I've been using my phone to compare the times. I've been measuring it against the Steinhardt. The Steinhardt has been running slower, and this has been running a little bit faster. And preferably you want a watch to run faster because, you'd rather be there before than after. So let's start talking about some of the details that I didn't cover earlier. Firstly, the gloss enamel dial. This is a very important inclusion that Ginault has made. When we think about the number of Homage watches on the market today, Submariner Homages or not, the number of enamel dials you see are quite minimal. How many watches have you found that have matte dials? Practically every single one of them. And what Ginault has managed to do with this enamel dial is introduce just another aspect of the design that is very appreciated. The enamel, when it's being shone on, is nice and reflective. It does shadow. If you look at the seconds hand, it has a very nice distinct reflection on the body. You can see that light in the corner, I apologize. But then when there's no light present, it really gets dark, like deep dark. And I think that is so cool. It really plays on that heritage line. Talking about the patina and the orange indices, I said in the previous review that I hadn't seen it before. That's That's bullshit, because we all know about Steinhardt and all those models that also replicate vintage mill sub designs. But I feel like what I was trying to say was that I haven't seen it executed so well before. All of these indices are raised, they are boxed around a silver finish or stainless steel, polished stainless steel insert, and it's really, really nice. And it's not a bright orange. It doesn't conflict. It doesn't get in your face. It is, it's a very creamy ivory color. And in certain lights it goes white, and in certain lights it stays this really interesting off-white yellow. Going into the whole idea of a no date, a very important aspect that I think many watches oversee, many companies oversee actually. For an introduction model, I think this is fantastic, because this is the first of their range that they've introduced, and introducing it as a no date is very historically correct. I mean, the first date Submariner was in the 70s or the 80s when they were first introduced. And sure, it opened itself to a whole new market, but really the very essence of a Submariner was to be as a tool watch and to be purely functional. And I think, again, this really plays in that field of being purely functional. Pairing classical proportions like this, because we know that the watch is designed around a 16-610 casing, very classical in the way it's fitted. It has a very nice domed bubble back case back. Pairing these classical proportions with a modern bracelet is something totally different and really unique, and I can't praise Ginault more for just doing that, as speaking as a designer. The sapphire crystal, being able to replicate this, we've seen this on a few other homages on the market today, but being able to replicate a sapphire crystal while also giving it that domed effect to play like an acrylic crystal is really nice. Again, acrylic is fantastic, but it scratches like crazy and really easily. This doesn't. This is rock solid. Again, with the aluminium bezel insert, also very, very nice, because it plays to that classical proportion, that classical component. And ceramic is very interesting, but it's very reflective, where aluminium is, the way it is colored, it's nice and dark. So when there is no light present, there is no reflection. It is a very dark looking watch, and it just plays to that classical feel again. One thing I didn't cover is the bezel. It has improved considerably since first arriving. Being worn and being used, it really is a very well functioning bezel, and I didn't give it enough praise at first because I felt like it was still very stiff and it wasn't very functional. But now that it has been worn in, it is fantastic. It really, you can feel each click, the teeth of the bezel bite very well inside, and you can just feel that it's very reassuring. The bezel lines up perfectly to that top indice. So really, I find this to be such an interesting watch in so many ways. Speaking from a designer's perspective again, the way that Ginault has attacked this initial model as an introductory model really shows what they're capable of in the future. They have, this is what I summarized in the last video, that they have a huge opportunity now to use these manufacturing skills that they've been able to develop to create models of watches that will shake up the industry, I would say. Not to say that this hasn't, but I feel like if they start making their own brands, their own style of dive watches, they will get a lot of attention. And I really hope that they get the coverage they deserve, because this is, to the best of my feeling, I feel like this is one of the best Submariner homages on the market today. That's not saying it very lightly, but I believe in the way, again, summarizing, in the way that they've been able to pair very, very classical proportions with a modern bracelet, modern approach, solid end links. I mean, this bracelet, something I didn't cover was just how tactile this bracelet is. It really, it is, there was a bit of a squeak in the last video I remember showing, but now that it's been settled in, it is so comfortable to fit. There's no friction. There's no flex. It is incredible. So another thing that I wanted to cover was the price. The way that these watches are being sold and priced at the moment. If we think about the prices of what vintage or the original Submariners were on the market today, this is why I think Homages get so much slack, but why I appreciate them is because Rolex became a luxury brand in the 80s. After they introduced gold models of Submariners, it really started jumping out to be a luxury brand. And these were the original tool watches. You know, if we think about the Submariner and the Omega Seamasters of the time, they weren't heavily priced. And because of inflation and because of the world we live in today, these watches, the Submariner of this caliber, is priced ridiculously. And I feel like these Homage brands, though they are fairly expensive, this is probably one of the most expensive Homage brands out there. They're introducing a watch that is affordable enough to be used every day as it was intended as a tool watch. And I think that is the most important part. Buying a luxury tool watch doesn't really interest me as much as buying a watch that was purposefully made to be used by the masses, just the way Rolexes were in the past. So I hope you've enjoyed this little summary of further feelings I've had behind this watch. I might do a third follow-up video a few weeks in the future to summarize a bit more detail. But really, don't fool yourself. Get your hands on one of these and feel, see, and understand what I'm talking about when I say that this thing is so well made, it'll blow your mind.